Hi, Mark.
Hi, Mike. Welcome to September.
Welcome to September. I might just have to drop off. I'll be back in a sec. I just need to close something down briefly. I'll be back in a sec. Sorry about that.
All right.
I'm back twice, it seems. That's confusing. It might just be us, in which case.
No, I'll give it a couple of. I will give it a couple of minutes.
No problem. How are you doing?
I'm well. It's summer's over. Ready to for more like full-time work as opposed to frolic.
Fair enough. Nikolai.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Mike. Hi, Mark. I'm on my way to find a room, so I'll mute and turn off the camera.
All right,
until
sounds good.
Stays.
See you in a minute.
And Manu as well.
What would we do without him?
Good morning, guys. You're too kind, Mark. How are you guys?
Doing
fine,
well.
thank
Doing
you.
well.
Are you
Am I seeing you next week, Manu, in Santa Clara?
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Jolly good.
And I took your guidance. We had the podcast recording last week, I think. Yeah, and it went very smoothly. Yeah, it went very smoothly, and I think Jason and I did an okay job. So
excellent. Good to hear.
What's happening in Santa Clara?
There is a meeting, not a meeting, a conference.
the AI Infrastructure Summit, it's called.
All right.
Yeah, that's the one.
Sounds good.
This one, put in the chat.
Nice.
All right, we'll begin in just a minute here. Hi, Matesh. Okay, so as usual, I'm just going to put in the chat the link to our meeting minutes.
Hey guys, been a while.
Yes. Okay. So we're now entering the final stretch of 25. So I wanted to make sure that we have our sort of vision for the rest of the year clear. Now, to that, I believe there are really two deliverables that I see. Please chime in if I didn't mention something. One would be making substantial progress on the reference architecture. And the second one is contributing to the best of our ability to the next IETF. And for that, we need to figure out what those contributions might be. And again, I would be looking to Hank and Tomasz as they're most active in the RATS working group. There was a third working group that just started that's kind of spun out of the attested TLS effort, and it's called SEAL. In case you don't know what that is, it's what does the one stand for? I have to look. Just 1 second, I'll pick it up. Well, it's a catchy acronym that now, of course, I forgot. But it has to do with evidence and attestation, secure evidence and attestation layer, I think is what they call it. But I looked at its charter, and in the charter, they say, I was looking for something to say to the effect of identity, and they mentioned that they will be collaborating with RATS, with the attestation SIG, the consortium, and with Whimsy. So that last piece is what I was really looking to see. So, it may be just we simply observe if they're going to end up with a Whimsy, compatible design, then ultimately that's that's all. But we'll see. Maybe there will be something, but maybe worth monitoring. Okay. So now we'll get to the Hashmesh, the reference architecture, in a minute. And again, as far as IETF contributions, I'm waiting for Henk and Tomasz. I will, after this meeting, if they don't join today, I will message them and simply say, hey, the time is going to be running short pretty soon here for November. So we want to do the work early. Last time, the Whimsy, like the 5-minute presentation at the FTF 123 took us perhaps too much time. So anyway, that's an untrivial effort. If we're going to do something, we need to understand what that is. Now, going back to the reference architecture. So I am personally a big believer in the iDesign method. That's Yuval Lowy and his book, Writing Software. If you haven't read it, and you're an architect, perhaps you should. So again, that's perhaps worth looking into. But what that iDesign method says is you have a very small number of core scenarios, he uses for humans. The scenarios survive, like really, really small number of scenarios, and then the use cases. And then he talks about activity diagrams, which is sort of business things, and then interaction diagrams. And then there is a 4 layer from client to storage structure of building blocks, encapsulating like business workflows and whatnot. I don't know to what extent all of that is appropriate here, but the one thing that really caught my attention with the iDesign method is he says that functional decomposition is the death knell of most architectures. And really, what most architectures need to accomplish is capturing all areas of volatility, right? So that's actually, there is some profound wisdom in that, again, I recommend that you read the book to see why that is. But I believe we do need to.
Could you put a link to the, just put the name of the book in the thing?
Yes, of course. Let me just type it up. You can look it up on Amazon. I think it's Yuval Lowy. I might be getting V's and W's backwards. And the book is called Writing Software. And I didn't get the umlaut over O, or a couple of dots, I believe. Yes, but that's no.
Don't worry about it. We'll work it out.
All right. So, Hank, hi. I was hoping you'd join.
Yes, I'm late. Sorry.
That's no worries. So I'll get right to you because I want to talk about IETF contributions and what they might be. But I think it's important, and perhaps we can do it during this meeting, to list all the areas of volatility that are inherent in workload identity. So as simple as how the workload identity is expressed, as a token or a certificate, a particular format. Whimsy today, maybe we want to make Whimsy our focus, but it can't be the only way, right? The architecture needs to capture the fact that, that would be one variance. Other variances might be, the lifetime of the workload, or we'll just go down the list. I don't want to go through that entire list here, but that when the architecture is done, we can sort of go back and say, did we actually address all the areas? Like, what happens if it's a new type of token? What happens if it's a different type of workload? And so down the list. And then you prove to yourself that yes, this architecture did in fact capture all of this and has the answers to what happens if as all of these scenarios combine. Okay. So anyway, so that's what I wanted to spend a little bit of time on. And then, Manu wanted to continue talking about the reference architecture and hash mesh. But to me, sort of that's a kind of an instance of this larger issue. How do we know that our reference architecture can, incorporate the mainline scenarios today, like, two endpoints doing a test of TLS to each other, or two endpoints just, engaging in attestation, getting a token, and then using, HTTP, right? Or something as, novel and exciting as hash mesh, but the architecture still is the same, in fact, for both of those. So anyway, let me put that on the stack for a second.
Yeah, and to clarify, I didn't mean to, I don't want to talk about our stuff. I just wanted to put it out there and summarize, how we think it maps to the thing.
Yeah,
but I don't want to monopolize the time here. It's one blueprint that we know works because it's in production, and I wanted to put it out there. That's all. I'm not trying to push for our stuff.
Oh, no. I mean, I do in fact believe that if you have a solution in the workload identity space, the reference architecture should be accommodating it. And if it's not, there is something wrong with the architecture, not with your solution. Most likely. Okay. So, Henk, I wanted to talk about this, and before you joined, so now perhaps is the time. How can we best contribute to, the next revolution of the IETF process?
Okay. Okay, that's a lot. Let me start with 1 or 2 minutes of musings, I'd say. If this is fine?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so Whimsy kind of breaks down. Is Michael here today? No, he is not. Okay.
Peter is not.
Yeah, Peter. Sorry, Peter Kasselman. Yes, Michael. I'm confusing names. Whatever. So URI. So Whimsy is a URI. URI is an identifier. Okay. In the end, what we need is a identity document. Traditionally, whatever you call it, it's a token, is it a certificate, it's a signed pub key. That typically is a minimal identity document. I think that is an assertion you just have to say out loud once and repeat 2 or 3 times. And the minimal viable identity document as of today is a signed pub key. And then some. So with X509 and ASN1, there's a pub key in there and a lot of things like issue, subject, alt name, whatnot, all the horrible things that grown in the last 30 years and is creating CVS every second week. That's in X509. So that's a very well-established identity document format. Then we have other identity document formats with different purposes and lifetime scopes. So you call that sometimes an audience or a scope or a purpose. All these identity documents serve different purposes. That's good. If you just have an identity document, you don't know what it's for. Is it your TLS server thing? Is it a AK cert? You don't know. So purpose, scope, audience, all of these additional attributes in these identity documents help. And then there is a third item I'm using as a trend that these, in general, lifetime should be short. So the CAP forum dominated by Apple, I'm saying it out loud, I think that's fine, is reducing a viable certificate lifespan again and again. Why? Because long-standing certificates can pose problems. On the other hand, if you want to sell something that's off the shelf and is lying there, that can't have a 14 days viable provisioning certificate because it will be broken when you buy it. It's expired. So how does it work? So again, purpose, scope, audience. These identity documents have different lifetimes according to their purpose and the audience and I think the duty they have to serve. So an identifier identifies, I think, a identity document. So we want to do a trusted workload identity here. I think that's the important point. So we have both tools at hand. We have the identifier, so the URI at hand, and we have the identity document formats that exist, JSON, CWT, ASN1 at hand. And we have to combine those to some extent, I think. Sometimes it's useful to have just the identifier, not the document itself. And the typical way to come from the identifier to the document is unfortunately called resolution. And this tastes a lot like DID. You take an identifier, resolve it to a URL, you go to the resolver, fetch an identity document and get that. That is a very uncontrolled process. You don't know if the resolver actually gives you the appropriate document. So no trust. That is something where, for example, and I heard this before, a tested TLS could come in handy. So you really can trust in the acquisition of the document by resolving your identity here, identifier here, the URI, to the actual identity document, and trust the resolver that it's actually doing what it's doing to do and nothing else with the attested TLS mechanism. But there's no attested TLS. It's not even a working group yet. It's the idea of a working group. And Seal basically highlighted, we are not trying to a certain solution. You're trying to pitch the post-handshake TLS thing, and you're already limiting it to TLS, and that's not what we want to do. Seal has a larger scope than TLS, and Seal has a larger scope than the post-handshake mechanism in TLS. That is have to be very clear. So we don't know what will come out of that surprise loot box here, right? So we don't know. So, but we do know is that we have identity documents which are at minimum signed pub keys, and we can have identifiers being able to point to them or actually enable us to fetch them via resolve. And that is something we can build on. Now we have the TWI architecture, and I think I already highlighted a few essential building blocks that we probably might need in that architecture. So now we have this composite of the thing you can't look into, which is the confidential part. We want to know something about, but the good thing about confidential computing is you can't look into it. And the bad thing about confidential computing is that an outside attester can't measure it. So we need the confidential workload to take on some duty. Microsoft calls it a parallelizer. There are a lot of things here. This probably shouldn't be black box. And also kind of be part of the architecture, I think, if we want to combine both the workload identity and the hardware, so the platform identity, I think we're calling it, and that. So these are already a few building blocks. You have to. I think that we can't. It's hard to talk about in the architecture as fundamental principle that exists. URI, identity documents and the formats, how to get from the identifier to the identity document, how confidential computing is two things that one thing can talk to the other, but the other thing cannot talk to the one thing because of the confidentiality we have here. And these are all basics we have to write up, I think, already. So that's TWI Architecture 101 content, I think, as a candidate set. You can bash all of what I just said and say, like, Hank, you're making this way too complicated. This is way too much. But I think that's the core we can at least discuss as candidates for the architecture content as an IETF draft to summarize and give context. And then we go from there. Basically, that's my embryonic plan that I have concocted in my own hamster wheel. That is my mind.
Now that all makes perfect sense. So, okay, I'll use a metaphor of a tunnel. where you start in with some requirements on one end, and the end of the tunnel is when you come out and you have a finished product and it works, right? And the approach that has worked for me well in the past is what I call the, drilling the tunnel from both ends, or eating the sausage from both ends, right? So you kind of, you understand some things about the finished product, right? So in this case, we say, well, like as you said, there's an identity document, e.g., Whimsy, JWT, or X509. So that's like one end of the tunnel. The other end of the tunnel is where you come in with, I have a trust execution environment and I have my verifier, and I need to start thinking about how to convert my attestation mechanism into this thing that I will come out of the tunnel with. And in the middle of the tunnel, there is a bunch of different paths you can take. So, there could be a reverse proxy in the middle, or you need to handle a fast train, so like a very quick, short-lived identity, and then maybe there are some long-lived identities, and there are things that are having to do with extensibility. So you need to basically, perhaps go down multiple paths inside that proverbial tunnel, right? So what we don't have today is an ability, and I'm like, unless I'm missing something, I haven't seen it. There isn't a verifier that issues your Whimsy token for your, attested T, which is the thing that prevents mass, update of existing application, right? And this is why we only have niche scenarios today, because we haven't really standardized how these attestation results map onto the kinds of mechanisms that people prefer to use. So this is there is no movement now. I guess you and I are saying the same thing here. My question then still is, we can write our own reference architecture, and then we can bring it to IETF, and they say, no, you're not speaking in our informational draft language, you're not using our process. So I really we can produce outputs in this working group as the outputs of the consortium, much like we're producing governance patterns of the GRC SIG, and there's value to that, of course. So again, my question to you as a veteran and sort of an experienced person at the IETF is, given the current state of affairs, how can we, in addition to developing our reference architecture here, how can we best contribute to the progress to be made in the direction we care about at the IETF?
I think the best way forward is always to write text. It doesn't matter where that happens. It can be a HackMD, it can be a Google Doc, it can be a CCC scoped document to start with. I think we have to be on the same page and speak as one voice. To quote Thomas Fossati, when you ask the TRI working group, we all should look like ninjas that speak with one voice. You can't discern us from opinion. That is best case scenario. So that's something to get on the same page. We need to have text to look at and be on the same page literally. So I don't care if it's the IETF. It's really important that we agree on text and do outputs. So that's my first message. And so that, I think, is in response to your direct question. And then it's not bad to go out with a wide thesis that is basically on one end or the extreme, and then water it down to some extent. For example, in remote attestation, there is this principle that nothing is atomic. Every attester you encounter, assume it's a composite. At least it's 1,000 attesters. If in the unlikely event that it's just actually one attesting environment for one actual system that is an attester, you have a composite attester with one component. It's always better to assume it's more than one and make that the general rule of the thumb. So how do we translate such a wild, approach to a TRI? Let's assume that every workload is so short-lived that you can't even assess its identity in its lifespan. Make it always an identifier, like a URI, and make it feasible to check its identity after it died, because it only left for 50 microseconds. That's a very, very wide statement, to assume that nothing is assumed to live so long that it survives the verification process. And it's still there after that. Maybe it's really, really important to make it make it feasible for any kind of volatility, because volatility is in the notes. That's why I'm coming up with this story here, and go from there. That's a wild approach. It is probably not necessary for a lot of scenarios, but it would match all of them because it matches the most critical one. Like in the composition of a tester, always assume it's more than one component. And with the try, always assume when you finished validating something, the thing is gone. So if you go into the game with that premise, that is not a necessary thing to do, but it's just to elaborate on an approach style here. You can go into the game writing down everything with this wild fringe assessment that everything is super short-lived. Then in the end, you will not have a problem with all these short-lived things. And if it's living longer, no problem. You have the identifier and the identity document and all the time in the world to do your processes. But if you start with this assumption of very small lifetimes, I think you're already taking into account a lot of use cases from Node.js or whatever, the load balancing, high throughput things that have to scale immediately. So that is something to be it is considered when we're writing something inside CCC. So 2 times of an answer. First, produce text. The end. That's the best thing, to be on the same page. We can all speak as one voice and be the ninjas we want to be. And the second thing is maybe start with a wild, fringy premise that we can water down at any time. But at least we can feel and experience what the demarcation line of feasibility is here while writing. And we are not forgetting the really hard cases and maybe don't write ourselves in the corner by not doing that from the start. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It evokes one thought I wanted to share, where there may be scope in this working group for addressing things that IETF legitimately does not care about. So that kind of causes a bifurcation. So there are some things that we do that we want to put through IETF and standardize, and there are some things that IETF doesn't care about because they are mechanisms that help out, but do not impact standards. So let me give you an example. So you just said how let's assume that all workloads can have all lifetimes, so sort of basically saying one set of standards regardless of whether your workload lives for just a blip or for like an eternity, whatever, right? Now and I think that's actually wise, right? And I take all your reasoning for doing that. That makes a lot of sense. In the world that I inhabit, which is very much applied, you may still want to make sure that if you issue a credential to a short-lived workload, that the workload may locally restart, or like a Lambda, just run multiple times on the same machine. And in that case, it actually makes sense to be able to, like steal some key to the platform which you're running. So next time you start on the same platform, you can just pick it up, not contact the verifier, and be off to the races. That does not impact any standard whatsoever, right? It's a sort of a local optimization mechanism that we can still document in this working group, but we don't need to push it through IETF as any sort of different novel approach.
That's very true. Everything we write here is like the big heap, the bigger picture, so to speak. And we can cut out the pieces that are worthy for a IETF reference architecture, and have the rest as helpful guidance, implementation detail, or maybe even common best practice that is not yet IETF ready in our own scope. That is, I think, absolutely fine. But having the one page is fine. Yeah, the same page.
So when you say write text, let's try to get a little bit more concrete on what that text might look like. So the RATS reference architecture has existed for some time, right? It has specified attestation results effectively from the beginning. And now here comes this working group and say, well, we would like to, let's just cut it down and just say, let's just say two things. We want to talk about how this works for what the impedance match is between rats and whimsy. So there is just, I don't know, maybe one set of text, and the other one says, and this is what it means for an identity to reverse a load balance. I mean, I don't know, like just two that came to my mind. How do you believe that something that might be delivered to IETF? Or is this even the right way to go about it?
That's a parallel effort. So Hannes Schofenig already, I think currently, I don't say the wrong thing, I think Siemens and some university, formerly ARM. So probably a lot of you know Hannes. He weaseled in an CSR attestation approach for workloads in one of the slide decks presented at the Whimsy working group as the very first mentioning of remote attestation at Whimsy. And following that, the FOSDEM in February this year, we met on site in Brussels and tried to elaborate on that. And then he immediately came up with a trustee model where the outside, for example, had encrypted workloads that you have to do key management for. Immediately, I don't want to say scope creep, but immediately a requirement that exceeded the core, right, of the trusted workload identity, because which workload actually is non-opaque and not encrypted. You have to do that also. So that is came with an immediate add-on that is an external key management service thinking for the encryption. So that is something, I don't know if that's relevant to Whimsy. Maybe it's super relevant to Whimsy, or maybe it's not. So I can only say that the first presentation about remote attestation plus, also RATS plus Whimsy, was including that notion. And I don't know if that's the correct way to do that. But I can say it's obviously something Hannes cares about, and it obviously is something that a lot of other solutions have inside their requirement scope. So I don't know what we think about that. I think we should keep it more to the core. But if, for example, of course, every workload is initially encrypted. What else do you think happens out there? If that's a core requirement, and we must kind of at least have an opinion about that. So that's my next thing that I think which add to yours. Is that thing relevant for IETF? I don't know. Is it relevant to CCC? I think yes, because confidentiality and encryption of workloads that are outside the confidential execution environment seems to be very much of a match. And so, so I don't know literally what is always in scope or not. But if we talk about what's known to Whimsy and what has been presented at Whimsy already, that's a notion that has been presented. And we can always build on what has already been presented. And I think we should have Hannes here and talk with Hannes about how to present RATS at Whimsy, because he weaseled that in with Peter Kesselman. Yeah. And I say weaseling, but he managed to get on the slide deck, right? So that's a thing. And so, to have him here and maybe continue from there and have a subsequent weaseling in, so we're a bit more inspired with more input from CCC, would be helpful. And of course, our target is next November. So I think we should have a talk with Hannes and invite him here and talk about the reality, what he thinks are building blocks from his point of view, and match them with our own assumptions. Again, we should write all these requirements.
Okay, so let me try and bring it into the sort of the practical realm once more, because I hear you, and I also want to see how that serves the goal of shipping product. So Whimsy is, and Peter is not here, and he would have probably cringed if I said it. It's a tiny bit schizophrenic. On one hand, it says we would like to stay out of the business of issuing credentials, and we would like to focus specifically on the credential format and how credentials are used, which is which is good. And then they also have this agent in their reference architecture, which is very much how credentials are issued, and is in fact incompatible with confidential computing. And it's my conversation, or our conversation, to have with Spiral, to basically say, how can we get the Whimsy architecture to pick a lane, and what does that mean? And this is perhaps where conversation with Hannes can also be useful. The rats angle of it, I hear you in not so many words saying, we don't particularly care what attestation results are, because the attestation results are ultimately your identity document. I mean, I don't know if rats says that, but like attestation results are presented to the relying party, and what else are you going to present to the relying party other than the identity document? But none of this helps one build a verifier that produces Whimsy tokens for workloads. And again, I'm trying to figure out how to influence that. Manu, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to roll back a little bit. The CCC and the IETF, as I said, I've been trying to see how we can contribute at the IETF. But what I've observed is that, and going back to your analogy, Mark, of the tunnel, and you want to drill, start digging the tunnel from both ends. I very much feel like this is the situation between the IETF and the CCC. The confidential computing is a foundational new capability that just did not exist before. And the entire purpose of the IETF is to move the world from the existing standards and then only fill gaps where there are gaps. So you always end up with the legacy of everything you've done. And one of the reasons why Whimsy is a little bit schizophrenic and other groups is that I've observed that the scoping of each one of these groups is always shrunk to the smallest possible scope. And that's why everywhere key management is out of scope, publishing public keys and where do I find the public key of something is out of scope and all those good things. And so I do want to warn and caution us. I think having Hannes here would be a very good move, Hank, because I think we need more IETF people, bathing and soaking into this, world that we're trying to build from the chips up. And so that would be a good move. But I'm skeptical, and I would be cautious about the idea of trying to modify Whimsy with what we can bring, because I think it's like these nested dolls, right? Which one fits in the other? And I think IETF is starting with a small cup and saying the CCC doesn't fit in it because the CCC is a bigger cup. And so what we need is put Whimsy in the CCC construct and not the reverse. So you start with the most secure posture, and then we can relax it. But if you say, I know all Whimsy implementation need to be able to support all these less secure use cases, then the CCC doesn't quite fit in there. Or at least, that's what I've observed, and the way we manage the identity of our workloads just really doesn't compute. We can bridge, and you keep saying we don't have an implementation that spits out, Whimsy tokens. We already, from the current architecture that we have, the current infrastructure, we spit out OpenID Connect tokens, which has just no difference. So we can issue virtually any format, any types of signed, token to any workload. That's not the issue. I think the issue is, as you per the architecture, approach that I forgot the name of the writer and the book that you recommended. I think the formats themselves and the signing, and Hank, you mentioned about, DIDs and public keys that are being published. I think those are formats. I think what we need to figure out is indeed what is CCC, what is confidential computing bringing to the table that just did not exist before, and then build from there, and then see how it bridges with the legacy world. So the end of the tunnel, digging back as opposed to trying to bridge. I like thinking of bridges instead of tunnels, but it's essentially the same thing, So anyway, so that's my feedback.
Okay, Matesh?
I honestly just wanted to add a bit of a hand wavy and more high level, I guess, perspective. So first and foremost, what resonates with me is what Hank said about, hey, let's just write something down, because I believe this is, really spearheading everything and kickstarting all the efforts we can do. We're on us, meaning CCC2I versus IATF. My personal stance is the following. We absolutely have to make sure we address any conflicts, because we cannot afford being divergent in between IATF and us to the degree where our architecture would literally ask somebody to abandon whatever IATF prescribes. Now, hopefully that being taken care of. Honestly, I'm not sure. I wasn't keeping tabs on the IATF 123, so I hope we are on a good traction there. But assuming that's taken care of, then I believe we have a decision to make, like how big of a entanglement or being intertwined with IATF we really want to be. Because I think it's, pretty objective statement to say the more the merrier. And if we are able to feed requirements into IATF and become, the de facto IATF standards with some of our stuff, well, it's better for adoption. But at the same time, I think it's also fairly objective to say it's going to slow us down. IATF processes are slower. We are a leaner organization, even, after all. So going back to where I started, I would say let's just, keep writing stuff where we control our destiny within this very group, and just feed it off to IATF, maybe even, run it by TAC, whether we want to engage with IATF on a more formal stance, maybe even go to IATF dispatch and instead of going through Whimsy, maybe, try to kickstart even a new, on the Cloud9 here, maybe even kickstart a very new IATF group. But where I stand on a, high level is really, let's make sure we produce our stuff, which is of quality, and we can kind of make it usable, and then feed it off into IATF as a back burner, provided we maintain compatibility throughout the process.
Okay, so two things I want to say to that. Oh, before I do, of course, Mike. You're muted.
Sorry, yeah, somewhat related to that and some not. I wanted to add a thing, which is that one of the things that we talked about at the governing board meeting last Wednesday was how we'd like to have more end user / customer involvement in the CCC, and in the same way that JPMC is one of our classic examples of that, although not currently members, they are very involved. And I have a kind of a neutral question, really neutral, which is either of one or two things true? One, the process of going through ITF might encourage participation by end users of CC. Two, being part of an IETF standard would encourage involvement in the CCC of end user companies. So I don't know the answer to either of those, and I'd love people's thoughts. That's it.
Okay, so I have two sort of comments that I've been thinking about. One is, as I said, Whimsy does have this agent, and Whimsy, when I say agent, is not really compatible with confidential computing. I mean, if you look at the SPIFFE and the Workload API, you cannot have confidential computing done with a parameter list Workload API. So that's an architectural hole in Whimsy, only because they incorporated agent into the Whimsy reference architecture. Now, one contribution could be, and that's something I need to figure out with Peter, is maybe there is a variant of the Whimsy reference architecture that would allow confidential computing to flourish and then have all the Whimsy compatible solutions flow from that. We'll have to figure this out. On the RATS side, it may be or Hank, please correct me if I'm incorrect here, but RATS does never say that attestation results or are this identity document. There is no
exactly.
My reading.
So
maybe that's the change.
That's an interesting notion. So I heard this is multiple times now that we might want to fuse. I'm not saying what the top level structure is here, but we want to fuse the trustworthy notion about an attester that's inside an attestation result and the identity document that identifies the attester's workload in one document. And I think nobody has done that before. There is the notion of an attestation result augmented evidence, but that is a optimization feature. Just as a micro red hole, what's an attestation result? Why do you have the distinction? Typically, the verifier and the relying party in the real world are collapsed roles. So that the verifier that consumes evidence, like an AMD SEV attestation report via 4 kilobyte byte blob, is so small and so easy to check, and easy in air quote here, that the policy is okay for a relying party. So the relying party also takes on the role of verifier that checks the evidence, and you don't need an attestation result. You can directly in your code, in your one entity that takes on both roles, just get this okay thing to the other part of the handle of the code. So roles can be collapsed, then you don't have an attestation result. But why do we think an attestation result is something worthwhile specifying in an architecture? It's because my cell phone will never be able to understand the cloud infrastructure of all banks and why their services are trustworthy. How should my phone check for that? It needs a trusted third party to tell me, the relying party, that tries to understand not only the certificate is viable, so trust echo checks green on my browser, but also this service actually is intended as it works, it should be, and I have this trusted third party that tells me how that is. That's the verifier. It takes on the appraisal of evidence. This is a long, tedious process sometimes. And that's why we have attestation results to decouple the burden of assessing all that information about a specific cloud setup, which might be highly confidential, actually. You don't want to expose to my cell phone because you're a bank and I'm somewhere and I don't know, other part of the world. So that's not, you just want to understand that the signature that this is okay is digestible and easy. That's the reason why the attestation result was decoupled from the evidence created by the attester itself, which is probably somehow the bank system.
Yeah.
And now we have this notion, well, the verifier could include identity documents, or the attestation results itself could act as the identity document, which is fine, but it is an addition to the initial purpose of the attestation result. The initial purpose was decoupling the burden, but now we are also like augmenting the usefulness of an attestation result with identity purposes. And that is an addition, which is fine on the red scope. You can introduce that concept on the red scope and it might make a ton of sense. So if you get enough supporters from typical stakeholders across the Reds realm, that's, I think, an easy thing to do. But you have to do that. You have to bring people on board with that.
So I hear you, right? And this is where I'm saying, this is where, very surgical IETF changes may go a long way. And specifically for attestation results, you have two architectural directions. One is attestation results include or are the identity document. Maybe there is an informational draft we can do to that effect. Another approach might be there is yet another service that maps attestation results to an identity document. Now, they all have their pros and cons, but intuitively, I do not want to map attestation results to an identity document because that's an extra network round trip, and that can become in itself an adoption blocker, right? So this is where it's important to figure out what would be the sort of the highest leverage position we can take with IETF to make the most beneficial change with the least amount of churn. And this is where I look to you for guidance.
Yeah, sure. So, okay. I'm making this more complicated now as is. We were talking about, so I was bringing up the idea, not we, I was bringing up the idea that things are very short-lived. If you only can understand things in retrospect, you need an audit path. Audit path typically is a transparency log. So if you, I'm just spitballing here, just give me a minute. If you would put everything you need, like the identity, the identifying claims, which could be an identity document or just the claims about the identity, and the attestation result into a transparency log. And that signed Merkle tree root is your pointer, you would have your identifier, which is the proof for being in the log. And you can check it after the fact because the workload already evaporated, but it's already enshrined in a Merkle tree log, for example. And you would have also the identifying claim / identity document in there and the attestation result in there and could look it all up. This requires at least trust in that entity that is a verifier, somehow an IDP or the identity management system, and a REDS verifier at the same time. But it would fulfill all these purposes in theory. Is that a lot? Yes. Do we want to go there? I don't know. But it would be a natural succession to address high volatility, things auditable after the fact, having identity or documents or identifiers in there, and the attestation results being fused in the same structure and being verified after. So now you have to put even more trust in that entity. In REDS, you already have to put trust in a trusted third party with a verifier. In our scenario, which I just made way more complex, I have to admit, you would have to put, again, trust in that third party. So I think the trust relationship management doesn't change. The complexity of doing it would, and you can't take it back. So if you make a mistake, you have to amend that with the update to that statement because you can't remove things from such a log. So I don't really know how the fusing works, or how the composition of identity document and attestation result works. I think that's IETF work, to be honest, because we need a lot of experts telling us this is bad, this is good, and we can't do this in our, but we can do the requirements on that. We can do the architectural needs, we can describe that here. And whatever tools or building blocks, whatever exists or don't exist yet, the next step to come. So coming back to your question, I think adding the concept of identity document to a small message, like an attestation result, already is done with the proofs created by transparency logs. So there's a similar technology out there that already does that. And maybe that's a good reference. Maybe we don't need a transparency log. Maybe we just have to mimic the behavior of such a attestation result being like a proof from such a log, or we confuse both capabilities and already address the after the fact volatility thing. I don't know. This is just, I just stop there. Yeah.
All right, 7 minutes left. There's been a lot of discussion of creating text. I'm just trying to figure out how we can create the right text. Mateusz, sorry, you have your hand up. So
just a comment on the spot to what Hank said. I want to kind of emphasize that I think going back to your previous statement, picking up the right problem is crucially important, because as far as I am a fan of Merkle tree proofs and transparency logs, it really becomes truly necessary when you distill your problem statement to say, I only am able to inspect my workloads retroactively. And then, of course, it justifies bringing up the big guns and having the solution always require a transparency log kind of a franchise, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. We might even go there, but I just kind of want to point out that there might be variances or variants of the problem space where some of the solution components might not be justified. I mean, not bring enough return on investment. So I just want to us to tread carefully with not overgeneralizing too much, because then we might end up solutioning in a direction where our resulting architecture would become immensely complex.
Yeah, and not adoptable. Exactly. So be careful. So yeah, attestation result being identity documents is a good first, I want to say, question. We can go to REDS with. Can your attestation results also be identity documents for workloads. Is that a thing? Could we make that work? Because the evidence originates from the workload and the workload platform composition. So wouldn't your attestation result be able to help us here? And that's a question we can go to Rats with. And because
so when you say question, is that an informational draft that we formulate this question in? Is it like what was the best sort of avenue to take?
If you do a draft, you would choose a lane. So basically, you would choose an attestation result to be the identity document and propose that and get that bashed. So I would assume if we go the IETF document lane, then we must choose an approach. And it might not be the winning approach in the end, but at least something to be discussed. I think that's the IETF process that works best, to come with a solution that's nice, but maybe not working out, and we will find out in the IETF process, and then it might be inversed or whatever, and or something that's entirely. So yes, I think for IETF process, we need to select a approach and which we deemed most likely to be successful, and let that get bashed.
Okay. Is this, I guess, again, this is a question to the working group now. Should we be investing our time now in authoring such a proposal for 124? Or should we then perhaps focus more on polishing our reference architecture? Because it sounds like there's going to be an opportunity cost here.
So, I mean, it's coming out of my ignorance with the IETF process, but I wonder, is there like a pre-step of just posing an open-ended question on their mail list and try to recruit, like, their members to help us co-author that?
That is always an option. So directly going to the list and like, hi, we are from the CCC. You have this slight disconnect between Whimsy and Rats, and we think your attestation results could be a thing that is an identity document for Whimsy. Would that work? We don't really know how to go through with that. We need some help, but where we assume that all the requirements and all the prerequisites are in your attestation result. Can you help us make that an identity document for Whimsy? That is a very specific question, and maybe that will entice some feedback. The sad truth is there could be silence, but also we can also trigger our friends and networks and entice some discussion here, and so that would work also. So maybe it's just not just writing an email, but also having a set of people that we can ask. Do you think that's right? It's a good question. Have some feedback early before we post it, and then have at least some noise on the list to entice that feedback. But I think dialogue is best, and an email, if it's well written, can be a precursor for an ID. Yes, but it also can be the sad truth that nobody is interested in the problem. Then you're just there.
All right. So, okay. Hank, do you think it would be appropriate for me to write such an email? Do you think you would be better off writing it? Anybody else in the group wants to volunteer? So that's question one. And question two is, how can we proceed with our reference architecture going forward? I think we should start making progress on that.
Okay, I think an email is a no-brainer, and we should do that. I think also Mark, if you would create a rough, I want to say, itemized list of contents for that email, we can take an hour of our time here and just write that email and just then send it out. But I think everybody has to see that, and maybe if someone wants to have, we can do it online. We can make it a Google Doc.
Let's do that on the mailing list, because I don't know, I can't see authoring an email together in a meeting for an hour.
No. But we should at least finalize the email in the next meeting. We can make it a online document. Everybody who wants to comment or change, just do that. And then next meeting, we will not that off. That's good enough. Okay, send. And then we have a set of people who we inform that we will send this email. Stakeholders from the CCC, so all the chips people, maybe some cloud people, CSPs, yada yada. And maybe we get some early volume of feedback. and then we go from there. That is predating any ID work, but it is also, again, the sad truth can be that there's just no interest in crickets. So that is not the best feedback we can get.
All right. Thank you all. We'll continue on the mailing list and see you all in a week.
Mm-hmm. And you will start the document for the email, please, Mark, yes?
Yeah, I will do that.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everyone.